Hi, good morning or very good morning from here in the UK. So I don't think what I'm talking about could be a greater contrast with what Minda has just been talking about. But I think there are some similarities which I hope to cover. I'm going to start. Sorry, I'll just click on to the next slide. That's it. I'm going to structure my presentation this way by first of all talking about the context here in England, then talking about the context of my research, and then looking at the contribution that my research is making. And I should just add that I'm talking about England. There are very different education systems in the UK, and I am specifically focusing on the education system in England. Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland are different. Um, so England, education is compulsory from the ages of 5 to 18. The vast majority of children are educated in state-funded education, about 94%. In primary, there are 13 compulsory subjects and national testing at ages 7 and 11. And that's in English and maths. And then at ages 11 to 14, there are 14 compulsory subjects. Citizenship is added at that stage. Between the ages of 14 and 16, there are 6 compulsory subjects, and the majority of 16-year-olds take GCSEs, that's the General Certificate in Secondary Education, in about 8 or 9 subjects. So in England, specialisation is already starting at age 14. Education is compulsory to the age of 18. Around half of 16 to 18-year-olds do A-levels, mostly staying on at their secondary school. Most of the rest do vocational courses or apprenticeships in schools, colleges, and employment. But whatever route they take between the ages of 16 and 18, their education is highly specialised. The absolute maximum any student would study would be 3 subjects at that stage. In terms of teacher qualification, to teach in a state-maintained school in England, you need to have qualified teacher status, and then you also have, that is sort of sealed off by 2 years teaching in a state school as an early career teacher. Now, you can gain qualified teacher status through a variety of routes, including postgraduate courses in universities or undergraduate courses in universities, or I think actually the majority of these days are trained in and by schools. But for all routes, in order to be qualified as a teacher, you need to meet the same standards, which you are then recommended to the Department for Education, and they give you qualified teacher status. And these are the standards that every teacher must meet. So qualified teacher status in England is not phase or subject specific at all. So if you have qualified teacher status, you can teach any age, any subject. But all initial teacher education is subject specific. So primary school teachers are nearly all trained as generalists. Secondary teachers are all trained as subject specialists, and usually secondary teachers, the vast majority, are trained as postgraduates in a subject that relates to their degree, but not always, and there's no rules that stop you from doing that. Incidentally, the qualified teacher status is also available as an international qualification, so you can get international qualified teacher status studying in your home country, teaching in your own country, but being trained by a university like ours. I had a look at the latest Department for Education statistics. Now, unlike our previous speakers, there's no agreed definition of an out-of-field teacher in England. But generally, the way in which it is measured by the Department for Education relates to qualifications. So these data that I've got on the slide here, they relate to people who have not studied that subject since the age of 18 at all, so have not got any qualifications in that subject beyond the age of 18, although they may have studied it at A level at age 16 to 18. The highest prevalence of teaching out of field is in science and modern foreign languages because of how the curriculum is structured, because all science teachers teach all 3 sciences, and at least languages teachers always teach at least 2 languages. Otherwise, the highest incident is in religious education, at around 25% of lessons taught. And then the next is maths, 13% of lessons taught. Every other subject, apart from those mentioned, is less than 10% of lessons taught. So it's not actually a large number of lessons, but it is a larger number of people. So those 13% of lessons in maths are taught by 30% of the people who teach maths. So they'll be people who have 1 or 2 lessons of maths on their timetable, maybe for a year or 2. And this presentation looks at what those people bring with them when they agree to have those lessons of maths put onto their timetable. So very quickly, this slide gives some details of my research, which is doctoral research. I won't go into them now, but I'll leave them there in case anyone wants to come back and explore my research, and my email address is there as well, so please do email me. Looking at my research focus there, you may sort of start to think that this is very different to what we've heard before, but in a contrast to the research in America looking at the impact of teaching out of field on students. But Minda finished her presentation calling for qualitative research into the experience of out of field teaching, and boom, here we have some qualitative research into the experience of people teaching out of field. I took 3 principles in my research. A lot of the literature focuses on what out of field teachers are lacking. Indeed, in the UK, we use the phrase non-specialist rather than out of field teacher. So just that our labelling is saying they are not something, they are missing something. And I reject that term. I use the term out of field teacher. If we want to avoid students suffering in the way that we've heard, we need to be positive about out of field teaching. We know it's not going to go away, and so we need to take a positive look at it, take an opportunity model. So that's my first principle. We acknowledge that no 2 out of field teachers are the same. They're not having the same experience, they're not bringing the same things. We acknowledge that out of field teachers already have knowledge of the subject they're teaching out of field. We acknowledge that they come with a variety of knowledges: personal knowledge, professional knowledge, academic knowledge. We acknowledge that the subject they're teaching out of field means different things to different people, which includes them. So, in other words, another of my principles is to acknowledge the complexity of teaching out of field. And finally, I recognise that out of field teachers are intelligent, experienced professionals who have made a choice to accept out of field teaching on their timetable, who make choices when they're teaching. They have agency, and I want to listen to that voice. So it was I wanted to take an original perspective to meet these principles, to focus on how the out of field teachers conceptualize the subject itself rather than their thoughts about how they teach it. So I focus not on how they cross boundaries into the subject, but how they cross boundaries within the subject and what they see themselves as a learner and doer of that subject. And I also focused on maths. So I created this conceptual framework that challenges the idea that we all know what maths is, and it challenges the idea that we all have the same understanding of maths. So I suggest that maths is not a homogeneous subject. I propose 4 forms of maths, which incidentally is a reductionist simplification. They are not distinct categories, but it at least gets us beyond the idea that maths is one thing. And I also looked at different aspects of knowing maths. So our ontology, what we think is the nature of maths, our epistemology, how we learn maths, and our axiology, what we think is the reason for learning maths. And on the slide here is a sentence summarising my findings. So overall, the out-of-field teachers participating in this study appeared to conceptualise maths as school maths through a complex student lens which mixed together their own experiences of learning maths and their students' experiences of maths. So what does this look like in practice, and what can we learn from it? Firstly, by focusing on the out-of-field teachers' subject knowledge rather than their pedagogical knowledge, I was able to observe the really complex conceptualization work that they did, recontextualization work that they did within the subject of maths. So their understanding of maths was almost entirely based on their experience of school maths from when they were a pupil or as a parent. They try to understand maths from their own students' perspective. And when asked to do some maths questions, every single participant spoke about what they thought their student would do and how they would approach that maths. So there are several things that I'll cover in a moment about what we can learn from this. But one important one is that out-of-field teachers are doing complex work within their out-of-field subject. They're not just moving between subjects. And I believe this should shape our support for them and how we support them in their professional development work. Secondly, the participants had a wonderful, varied and rich and complex understanding of what maths is, which is exactly what the literature said about in-field teachers of maths and about academic mathematicians too. So one thing we can learn from this is not to treat out-of-field teachers as if they have a shallow or deficient philosophical understanding of the subject just because they didn't study it at university. These participants had a rich, deep, creative understanding of mathematics. Thirdly, participants constantly returned to human relationships. Even when they were talking about or doing maths in their interviews, they tended to be talking about other people. And one example that really stuck with me was the 2 oldest participants. They talked about the person that they sat next to in their maths lessons over 30 years ago. They told me their name. They told me how good that person was at maths. So these out-of-field teachers brought with them a strong human element to learning maths. And I'm sure we've all met people who've told us, maybe I would have got on with maths if it was less abstract and more about people. So we could learn from these out-of-field teachers about how learning maths is a social process as much as it is a cognitive process. Finally, I got the strong message from my data that the reasons these out-of-field teachers had for learning maths were about personal fulfillment. Now, an obvious element of this is leaving school feeling that we are qualified and have qualifications that will be recognised and make a difference in our future lives. But I found that it wasn't just about passing exams. Participants recognised that success in maths provokes certain emotions in us, and that these are emotions we want to experience. And I called this maths for personal growth. And I think there are 2 things we can learn from this. One is that the out-of-field teachers in this study were all driven to ensure that their learners were able to experience these emotions and to experience personal growth. The other is that they situated themselves alongside their learners as people who know what it's like to struggle with maths, and they will work persistently with those students to overcome their barriers. Several participants actually stated explicitly that they felt they were better teachers of maths than in-field teachers because of their empathy with learners. Now, whether you agree with that or not, one thing we can learn is that out-of-field teachers in this study were very focused on their students' needs, more than they were in the needs of maths as an abstract concept, or on the needs of the economy or of society. Their focus was on the needs of their students. So this last slide summarises the things that I suggested we could learn from our research, and that's me done. Any questions?